today. And as you know, we'll have our guest lecture. And before I say a few words, I'm Raphael Zähringer, who I will introduce Irish Studies.
Yes, hello everybody, and welcome on this icy but very nice morning, and welcome to Irish Studies, and welcome to our guest lecture with Mr. Zähringer from the University of Tübingen. And I just wanted to say a few words on Irish Studies, as you can see it here, and it's all online, so if you're interested, you can have a look around our website. And you can also read something about us. So a couple of years ago, Ina Bergman and myself, we founded Irish Studies Würzburg. We usually call it ISWÜ, Irish Studies Würzburg, having the abbreviation. And we have a close connection to Ireland personally, as well as job-wise, so to say. We have excursions, etc. You can all read that on the website. And we thought it makes a lot of sense to found that in Würzburg, because as you might know, I don't know if you are familiar with the history of Würzburg, you can read it here because the Irish monks Tigan, Caldwell and Totman, you can see them in stone on the Main Bridge. They brought the Catholic religion to Würzburg in the 7th century, so it is far back in time. And this is where we thought it is a good connection. And today, within Irish Studies, we have a focus on Irish literature, language, and culture. We focus on not only the Republic of Ireland, but also on Northern Ireland, of course, and also the Irish diaspora. And we are trying to connect what scholars do, PhD students, but also students like yourselves, and how we can integrate all of that into focusing on everything that belongs to Irish Studies. And here in teaching English as a foreign language, which is your course, we deal with why Irish Studies in the EFL classroom, what can we teach, and we have a focus on that today with a short story, and how can we embed that in schools these days. So welcome again, and enjoy the talk, and I'll pass over the word to Jennifer Meyer again.
Okay, thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce Raphael Zähringer. He is Assistant Professor of English Literatures and Cultures at the University of Tübingen, and he is a founding member of the Tübingen Center for Irish Studies. His key contribution to Irish Studies was his completed habilitation thesis, Writing Crisis, Ireland from 1596 to 2018, which reads Irish literature as a powerful seismograph as well as the Irish border. He has taught and is teaching at the moment several courses in Irish fiction and drama. Currently, you're extending your research into Irish science fiction, and with your most recent project being the Tübingen database of Irish science fiction, which I find really interesting. So really looking forward to your talk today, having read the short novel and the introduction. So welcome and have a great talk.
Thank you. Good morning, fellow human beings, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's both an honor and a pleasure. So this talk was announced as Post-Tiger Island, which is obviously very broad. So for the description and the purposes of today, I narrowed this down to Irish short fiction or contemporary Irish short fiction. So that's what I would like to focus on today. Specifically, I would like to explore how the contemporary Irish short story and the short story anthology, as its most important format of publication, and negotiate Ireland in what is often described as a post-agreement and post-Tiger context, both of which are linked to a larger meta-narrative of Ireland as constantly being in transition. So the plan for today would be the following. I'd like to start with this quick look at these different terms, post-agreement Ireland, the Celtic Tiger, and how this short story anthology, being various, fits into that context. We'll then zoom in on writing Ireland in the 21st century short story specifically. Since this is a short story, and since I find it very important to discuss the short story not alongside, but in comparison to the novel, I would also focus in on a couple of short story aspects that might also be relevant for this particular story. And then, since this is part of the seminar, I thought we could have some student-centered component somewhere in the middle. So this is why after that, I would like to, instigate a short, maybe partner work or discussion on then the theme of Irishness and how it is present and negotiated in this short story for today. So Kayama's alienation. And then I'd like to zoom out again a bit by looking at the short story anthology. So again, the format of publication as what Elke has called a polyphonic echo chamber. I'll then have a quick conclusion and then we can get into questions, a broader discussion, and so forth. So I hope that is okay.
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
All right, we'll see how far we get anyway, but we'll see how we do. Okay, so the key example, as mentioned, will be Alienation, a short story by Aya Kayamo that was published in 2018 in the short story anthology Being Various, New Irish Short Stories, edited by Lucy Caldwell. As we will see later, introductions to anthologies are very important, so this is why I will take my cue from this. Being Various is a so-called commissioned anthology, which means that Caldwell, as the editor, approached fellow writers and asked them to write a story specifically geared towards the purposes or the theme of the anthology. Other anthologies work differently, right? You can have anthologies that recycle older stories or that republish older stories or that have an open call, something like that. So how does one, as the editor, decide which authors to approach? Here is what Caldwell writes in the introduction. I took as my starting point the Good Friday Agreement, deciding to focus on writers who've begun publishing since then. Recently celebrated and newly imperiled, the Good Friday Agreement changed everything for my generation. Suddenly, psychologically, we were free to experiment with and to embrace pluralities, contradictory ways of being. The new in New Irish Short Stories therefore refers to the stories published in 2018, of course. However, considering this opening, the new starts much earlier, right? It refers back to the generation of writers that witnessed the sea change brought about by the 1998 peace agreement, which, as you will probably know, marked the official, in heavy inverted commas, official end of the Troubles. So the Northern Ireland conflict. Obviously, this end impacted on Ireland's and Northern Ireland's politics, economy, but also on people's mindsets. In the words of Falke and Reynolds, it is little exaggeration that these decades are rife with transitions so dramatic they seem themselves the stuff of fiction. And crucially, these changes brought about what Marie-Louise Pratt and others have called new tellabilities. That means the interplay between what can be told and what is worth telling. For today's purposes, this concept may refer to new ways of imagining, writing, thinking, and speaking about Ireland. First, this may refer to a readjustment of thematic tellability, as I put it here, meaning that certain things now become tellable that, due to, say, social taboos, could not be addressed during the Troubles. A good example would be the psychological damage caused by sectarian violence, for instance. Second, structural tellability means that the Good Friday Agreement reconfigured what is considered to be interesting, relevant, or worth telling in the first place. And given the wrenching changes of the late 20th and 21st century, it is no wonder that new aspects of Ireland and Irishness are foregrounded in the wake of these changes. So Caldwell was born in Belfast in 1981, and her parents considered emigrating before she was born. Combined with the political and psychological weight of the Troubles, she refers to her identity as the tug of my complicated relationship with the place I'm from. Its eddies and swirls and undertows, cross currents. And then she zooms out and asks more generally, what makes a writer Irish? Who is more Irish? A writer born in Ireland who moves and stays away, or a writer born elsewhere who chooses to come? And there's that here again. A writer born in what is technically Ireland, in the island of sense, but who chooses to identify with the mainland. A writer born outside of Ireland to parents who keep it alive through songs, St. Patrick's Day, and waking up in the wee hours to watch the rugby. A writer born in Ireland to parents from elsewhere, who constantly has to answer the deathly question, no, but where are you really from? These different ways of being Irish are, of course, closely related to the larger transformations of the late 20th and 21st century. As mentioned before, the peace agreement put an ostensible end to the Troubles, but this did not happen in a vacuum, of course. Instead, the peace agreement went hand in hand with other changes in Ireland. As an effect of several reports that unveiled the extent of systemic child abuse in the Catholic Church, Ireland became more secularized, for example. In 1990, Ireland had its first female president, Mary Robinson, and the following years, brought about the legalization of divorce, contraception, and homosexuality. Ireland was also integrated into a global culture after the peace agreement through its EU membership and its rise to the most globalized society in the world. This development in turn is closely tied to the Celtic Tiger, a term that described the economy of Ireland from the mid-1990s to the 2008 recession. These years saw rapid economic growth in Ireland that turned high poverty, unemployment, and inflation into a growing national confidence, economic optimism, and opportunities. In these years, Ireland also turned from a country of emigration into a country of immigration. So suddenly, because of these new opportunities created by foreign direct investment, low corporation tax rates, and Ireland's digital revolution, among others, Ireland became attractive for foreigners. But of course, this new wealth was not distributed equally. As you will know, the Celtic Tiger economy then went bust in 2008, which caused more changes. Political priorities changed and now included more emphasis on, for instance, social housing, childcare, the integration vis-à-vis assimilation of newcomers, or the role of women and mothers in the labor force. Coming back to what I said earlier, I think it is important to consider these larger developments in order to understand the complexities of contemporary Irish identity and, as a result, Irish writing. Not only do we still have to deal with the aftermath of the Troubles because an official ending does not mean that the past is at rest now, it also ushered in further change in which tradition and modernity, past and future collide. And these collisions, these transformations, these new ways of being Irish against the backdrop of being various are at the heart of contemporary Irish short story writing, I would argue. Against the backdrop of the swift but by no means smooth transitions since the 1980s, contemporary writers have attempted to maintain a double focus, if you wish, straddling the balance between a wide-angled view that considers the larger forces shaping the global economy and world, and one that pays attention to the nuances of Irish culture in the face of such forces. So this is then the basically extra-textual context of these anthologies, this persistence of resurfacing of pre-agreement notions and the impact of the challenges that come with this transformation. And what you can also see, I think, nicely is how these different periods or phases of Ireland in the late 20th and 21st century are neatly strung together, as Caldwell did as well, right? So there's a more or less direct link, or Ireland is told as having direct links between agreement, Tiger, post-Tiger, that do not necessarily have to be causally linked, but they are interestingly perceived as being linked in this way. So if we turn to then the literature of this phase of Ireland or being Irish short story writing saw an upsurge in the closing decades of the 20th century, and it keeps flourishing, it seems. Among others, as mentioned before, there are lots of Irish science fiction short story anthologies by this time. Therefore, Caldwell is not the first to address these transitions and transformations, and her anthology is part of a continuously growing body of texts that deal with the shifting contours of what it means to be Irish in the late 20th and 21st century. And a quick glance at the titles and covers of this very small sample size here demonstrates the range we are dealing with. For many, Roddy Doyle's The Devotee is here at the top left. From 2007 is a signature text that foregrounds encounters between someone born in Ireland and someone who has arrived in the country to live there. Now, Doyle himself was born and raised in Ireland, so his take on Irish immigration is vastly different from those presented by, for instance, Daniel Suchowski in The New Dubliners or Meleta Uche Okori in This Hostile Life, right? So these are people who themselves do not have a native Irish Jewish background. And others focus on works by women writers, again with fresh perspectives on what it means to be Irish today. And Caldwell, of course, is aware of this. She situates her anthology within this particular context. As she has it here, the fresh narratives, perspectives, and multiplicities that are coming from immigration to a place so long persistently defined by emigration. So here again, we have this change, right? We are all the lesser for not having these stories in our common cultural experience. And I hope we are at the verge of such new voices beginning to come through, or at least to be heard. So the agenda of this anthology is quite clear. It deals with Irishness under the influence of these new impulses, especially emigration, and as she remarks elsewhere in the introduction, diversity, so being various, right, in broader terms. In order to describe contemporary Ireland, she concludes, this anthology and many of its individual stories ask again and again, questions about contemporary Irishness, which, like those I asked on a personal level, so those we've had before, right, cannot be answered, only further complicated. Productively complicated, I would like to add. So if we focus on immigration, then it is interesting to see the development of its depiction in these anthologies. The first collections and anthologies dealing with immigration, according to Paul Delaney, primarily featured texts where immigrant characters are central to the narrative action, but appear as ciphers with little sense of agency or subjectivity. And he specifically refers to the deportees here, again by Roddy Doyle. So many of those stories have these native, again, maybe in inverted commas, but this encounters between native Irish people and then people coming from elsewhere. But in these texts, you hardly ever get an insight into this new arrival's consciousness. Contrastingly then, more recent attempts to write immigration in short fiction are more subtle and numerous than is sometimes supposed, and bear witness to a certain self-consciousness in the act of representation, as well as to concerns with the adequacy of the written word to convey that which is deemed unfamiliar or other. Alienation by Cayano, and therefore written by an immigrant rather than about an immigrant, fits into this latter category, of course, and as we'll explore later. Still, what these earlier stories on Irish immigration share with the later ones is that most of them negotiate a fundamental disconnection, as Delaney puts it here, disconnection between the figures and the communities that they are resolutely not a part of. While immigration refers to the physical and legal act of moving to a different country, there is also the process of building a life there, which obviously is at least as complex. And also what one could add maybe here, because we talked about immigration and different concepts of migration earlier, you also find many stories of returned immigrants who fail to deal with change, right? So they've been away from Ireland, they come back, and then they see this country has changed so massively that I cannot really deal with this, or that I'm struggling with dealing with this. Scholars dealing with this new island, this post-Tiger island marked by immigration, emphasize the importance of the short story as a genre. This is not to say that other genres do not deal with these issues, but it seems as if the short story is particularly well suited, as stated in these two quotes. So Heather Ingman has the following to say about this. The short story exposes what lay hidden in Irish life: unwanted pregnancy, homosexuality, infidelity, and alcoholism, an increased willingness, even in the popular short story, to challenge the Irish Catholic construct of female identity and expose the limitations of the family unit in which the Irish Constitution has been founded, and which is still present in the Irish Constitution, right? One of the key phrases that you find in the Constitution is still that Ireland is built on the foundation of the family, of the traditional family, right? And if we go further, then we have this one by Delaney again. Short fiction provides a productive space for imagining submerged population groups. This is Frank O'Connor, I think, and is especially appropriate in situations, so colonization, deracination, transition, and exile, where lives are fractured or have been disturbed. Representations of immigration have gained particular significance in short fiction, as a variety of writers have used the form and the constraints of the form to engage with intercultural encounters and social renegotiations in contemporary Ireland. As mentioned before, I'd like to talk about alienation slightly later. This one is obviously about immigration, but given all these different terms here, it's quite obvious also that different categories of identity intersect here, right? So it's not only necessarily about immigration, but gender might come in, for instance, sexuality, and so on and so forth. And one could easily add to the list here mentioned by, or given by Iman, sectarian violence, the challenges and changes brought about by digitalization, and many, many others. So if, as I tried to show you, this new island, this post-Tiger island marked by immigration is mainly dealt with in short stories, one must ask the question, why? Why is the short story well suited for this? And what are the historical reasons for this? Therefore, we should engage with some of the basics of short story theory. Maybe before I get into explaining a couple of things, since we have a lot of time on our hands, maybe just based on your experience as students of literature, what could be some key components of this? So what would you imagine could be interesting in terms of short story writing and reading and making? That could be interesting here. Why are short stories maybe an interesting vehicle to do all these things here? Any thoughts? Yeah, over there.
Usually there's one main character and one main plot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, how would that be maybe then conducive to this?
Yeah, we can then focus on one thing and really detail that story.
Yeah, you get this one particular life or slice of a life, right? Not this holistic picture that the novel seeks to provide, but this particular glimpse at one particular experience. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay. Other ideas?
We also read short stories differently because we have the time to read them in one sitting or even read them to each other in one sitting, and that makes talking about it easier.
Yeah.
And offers a deeper interaction, I'd say, because you don't stop, take a pause, and then later come back into the story, but just submerge yourself in time.
That's, yeah, okay. So it's one intense experience, right? In contrast to reading a novel over a couple of days. Yeah, okay. Since you also mentioned that it is quicker to read, it's also quicker to write, right? Not necessarily easier to write, but the fact that it can be written and produced in much quicker than a novel might also lead to this idea that short stories can pick up on things quicker on current social trends, for instance. Yeah, okay. Maybe one other? Yeah, over there.
I'd say fractured stories, so you don't have like someone as a child slowly growing up, but you're either only able to have like a little glimpse of a certain, like a few days a week, or you have very short glimpses into childhood, adulthood, and novels usually like to expand.
Yeah. Thank you. Very nice. Absolutely right. So this idea of if we agree that these lives that we have in contemporary Ireland are fractured somehow, then of course is a form of writing that hinges on this idea of fractured experience is of course a very good combination. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? All right, then let's maybe have a quick look at some of this conceptual background and with some terms, right? So first, then it must be mentioned that the short story leans towards subversion generally, right? So in contrast to, for instance, the novel, which sits comfortably at the center of literary production and reception, the short story is rather conceived of as a form of the margins, also historically, right? In fact, from the beginning, the short story was considered a form mediating between the novel's quote, medium of prose and its peculiarities of stories and narrativity, with the metaphorical language and strategies of indirection of poetry. So from the beginning, it's kind of a mix, right? And the intensity, tension, compression, and suggestion of the lyric mode. So somewhere in between, well, poetry then and the novel, right? The language of one and the storyness of the other. Short stories also tend to focus on outsiders, on characters on the margins of society. In this context, and in contrast to the novel's seemingly holistic take on society, the short story embraces hybridity and liminality as key concepts. In slightly different ways, both refer to mixtures, crossings, and in-betweenness. And it does not take much effort to link these terms and concepts to the complicated relationship with the place I'm from, as Caldwell put it in her introduction, or the different configurations of Irishness she raises there. And speaking of these marginal characters or marginal cultures or groups that would pick the short story as their vehicle of choice, we can find many examples in the Irish literary history, of course, right? One could look at the new women writers in Ireland who freed themselves from the traditional plots of the Victorian novel, or Edna O'Brien's work that addresses the constraints of patriarchal Ireland in the 1970s and 80s, or the marginalized characters we find in Mary Beckett's Belfast stories set during the Troubles. So all of these might provide alternative views to dominant discourses. Most of them, again, Irish, Catholic, white, male. As so often, I guess. Right. No, so we're still here. For them, the short story hinges on what Viorica Patea calls an aesthetics of economy. We've been there before, right? One of your contributions. It is short, so every single word must be relevant. Even little details that would just be considered decoration elsewhere are endowed with meaning, and meaning behind surface meaning. So even if there is maybe, I don't know, a tiny lamp and it has in a certain color sitting on a shelf, ideally it means something, right? In the short story specifically. Furthermore, since the form is so condensed, what you do not say, but only allude to or leave out entirely is just as important. And given this art of brevity, as Charles E. May famously put it, the short story is not interested in providing a holistic picture of life. Instead, it thrives on fragmentation and individualism. So again, this was one of your contributions as well, right? It provides glimpses, slices, or snapshots of reality instead that go hand in hand with individual experience. As it does that, it caters to the experience of modernity. Modern society is highly complex and fractured, and it is quite striking to observe that the flourishing of the short story coincides with that of industrialization, and nowadays with digitalization, of course, right? So if wholeness is no longer possible or tellable in our world, the short story seeks to capture this sense of dislocation, rootlessness, unpredictability, and alienation. And this would then bring us to, well, this story of the same name, alienation, right? So, as I've heard, you've already read this story in class, so this is what I would like to focus on. So given everything that we've talked about so far today, what I would like you to do for, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or so is get together in teams of 2 and then just look at this basic guiding question using these categories that are provided here. So how does this short story alienation negotiate Ireland and Irishness, different ways of being, maybe specifically under this heading of being various? And you may look at these different categories, right? So obviously, as mentioned before, we have these different categories that define people within the context of certain cultures, so gender, race, or ethnicity, and class. You may look at further categories, discourses, and themes that have been mentioned, right? Religion and secularization, marriage, migration, obviously, work, health or mental health. These collisions between tradition and modernity that I've mentioned, the interplay between global and local elements that could also refer to as glocalization, this interplay, right? Character design, narrative technique, if that's your thing, or the typical short story features we just explored. And maybe we could do this maybe in the way that people in the back, that you start with the categories from the bottom and the other people sitting in the front start at the top. Would that be okay? Again, just 10 minutes and then we'll go into a discussion of these different things and see where that takes us, all right? Okay, thank you. So I hope I mean, obviously 10 minutes won't be enough to discuss every single detail, but still, maybe let's just gather a few thoughts. So in your groups and teams, what did you discuss? Yeah, please.
So we said we picked up the topic of when you're a mother or a wife, you only see yourself mostly as a woman because it's really hard to get out of that structure. And yes, this clashes kind of with identity because you have to find yourself when your kids are out of the house and your husband leaves, then you have to find yourself in a completely different way.
Yeah, absolutely. So here we see, right, how then nationality or being an immigrant coincides with being a wife or a woman, and then how this facilitates certain roles that may or may not fit the current discourse or context. Yeah, okay, absolutely. Or how that disadvantages you in certain contexts. Absolutely.
We talked about how her true nationality is omitted until the very end and how it changed our perception of the story, because as she talks about the German language in the text, it kind of made us feel that perhaps she might be German, and that of course relates to us differently. But it was very interesting in the end when it was revealed that she was not, in fact, not German, but Czechoslovakian and Hungarian. Yeah,
and interestingly, the author was born in Finland and then raised in Sweden. So there is it's very European here, right? Yeah, okay. And this kind of, maybe then to pick up on this kind of then migrant is very different from the other migrants described in the story, right? These African women are a very different kind of migrant, right? They stand out because they are, they take up more space and they're flamboyant and loud and everything, right? So this is a very different way of being a migrant and being received as a migrant, right? Did anybody talk about that in some detail, maybe? Yeah.
A little bit about, I think she calls it dark foreigners, fair foreigners.
Yeah.
And how she feels like the dark foreigners are able to, they don't assimilate, so they still have their own customs, but she feels like they have more reason to be an Ireland. So they fled from something horrible, from corruption, and now in Ireland they're better off. And she went here with like a husband and wasn't left alone with the kids and had to just kind of learn how to survive in England, and she didn't even want to stay. And the entire story feels like she would actually like to be somewhere else, but she doesn't exactly know where she would like to be.
Yeah.
But she just knows she doesn't want to be in Ireland.
Thank you. You mentioned these two important terms, right? Assimilation and integration, which both relate to migration, but in very different ways. And they are facilitated by different factors and aspects and different institutions, right? You can always try to, I mean, this is what often happens, right? That integration is, or the way around, that you are supposed to integrate, but what governments or some people really mean is that you assimilate, right? Which some people can do easier than others, and some people can't do it at all, right? Yeah, okay. Other aspects, please. Yes.
We also talked about the fact that a tradition would be like that she's a single mom now, and the modernity part would be that she still like tries to find work and becomes this author.
Yeah, okay. Did anybody talk about this author, being an author a bit more? I found that one super interesting. Yes.
That's how she kind of finds herself again and kind of work on what she's experiencing, while also kind of breaking or going, if we have the topic of borders, she's crossing a border because she's making others see how she feels as she writes these little stories. And they go over borders because it's also read in Finland and Germany and stuff.
Yeah, thanks. Is that a direct response? Yeah, please.
I think it's especially interesting because I think not the first storyline, but like the one where she imagines like a little land with the people, the animals. I think they're solely for people abroad because the pieces were syndicated for papers and magazines abroad. So I think it's writing about Ireland, reading in Ireland, but for people who are not in Ireland and who maybe no Irish identity and just like to read about like the beauty and imagined storylines that could be set in Ireland.
Yeah. I found this contrast so interesting because it describes two very different ways of writing about Ireland, right? On the one hand, we have this more or less honest, tongue-in-cheek kind of way of writing about Ireland as it really is, in heavy inverted commas, right, from her perspective. And then we have this idealized lush green hills and the coast and sheep and everything, right, leprechauns maybe. So the typical Irish cliches that are being pulled off here, right? So this typical way of conceiving of Ireland, again, outside of Ireland, I found that very interesting, and that these two extremes seem to provide a space where she, as you put it, can flourish as a writer and possible person, right? And that also secures her financial stability to a certain degree. That this kind of dealing with Ireland, in this contrast, I still cannot fully get my hands on that, but I found it super interesting. And it also reminds me of an article I recently read by, I think it was Sarah Townsend, where she says that a lot of contemporary Irish migrant fiction features characters that rely on such cliches, so that they reimagine, for instance, romantic storylines or something like that. So there seems to be something there that one could dig even deeper into. Okay, yeah. Did anybody talk about short story aspects, short story features, narrative technique, anything? Or again, any of the other categories here? Yes, please.
We talked about that the short story is kind of like a momentum or like a moment of truth for her, because it truly shows her inner conflict and her realization and also reflection of the things that she's going through. And with the kids out of her house, she's like questioning her whole life again. And we talked about the inner conflict. So she's like, I don't feel at home here. I don't feel welcomed here. I feel like an alien. But on the other side, she's trying to fit in because it was her life. It still is her life. So she's very torn between those two sides, and that's why she doesn't know what to do. And
Thank you. Where do we see this in the story? Any key moments, maybe? You mentioned this very good term called realization, which resonates in this context of the short story, maybe. short story theory. Yeah, over there.
I think it was with the hairdresser.
Yes, okay.
When the hairdresser asked her where she really comes from.
Yeah, really come from, here we go again, right? Yeah, please.
And yeah, I think she did make kind of an euphemism. She just simplified the response and she told that she's from the Sketch Republic originally.
Yeah.
And but she lives here since a long time, so she really wanted to be integrated and accepted by the
Yeah. So here we go again, right? That you have to define yourself according to categories that don't make sense to somebody else. So here again, identity is being, on the one hand, then is complex and then is being simplified for certain reasons. Yeah, okay. And then we have this back a bit further down, right, where she looks into this mirror. I found that very symbolic, right? So, where's that? I began to feel panicky, thinking of the unkind cut she must have in mind now. I had to repair relations fast. I said, I love it here, I love Ireland. I stared at myself in horror. So this is the cliche again being pulled, right? You're here because, again, the grass is greener, everything is nice. Ireland is great. I stared at myself in horror, or a mirror image of myself, me reversed, because what you see is not what others see. They see your face the right way around. That's why people hate their passport photo. The photo is not what you think they look like. I couldn't bear to look at my mirror image, my false face, much longer. So what kind of face are we talking about here? So how does that maybe resonate with everything that we've talked about so far? What do you think? Or is there a true face or false face in the first place? What's the problem maybe then with this way of conceiving of herself? Yeah.
Maybe that when she looked into the mirror, she saw kind of like her false identity that she built up over the years. And she was shocked because she couldn't see her true self in a mirror where you actually, it's the only way you can truly see yourself.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. First, I like that, right? I mean, this is the thing, right? Who are you in the first place? Again, right? What makes a writer Irish, or what makes a person Irish? So where are you really? If you cannot be Irish, fully Irish as accepted by everybody else, but you cannot be your old you anymore, right? So again, liminality, you are this one not anymore, and this one you are not yet. So where are you really? It leaves you in this space somewhere between the actual person and then the thing that you see in the mirror, right? And since you mentioned realization, this is the term that reminded me a lot of this of James Joyce's idea of the epiphany. Does anybody? Are there some people nodding? Right? This reminded me a lot of that. You have this sudden moment of realization. Oh, okay, this is then the key moment of understanding something significant, and this could be the case here as well. Although, right, she then declines tea or coffee, and I closed my eyes to indicate that I was ready for the cutting to commence. Basically, just accepting it all and just yeah. All right. Any further thoughts or aspects? If not, we could move to the anthology then as a format. If you're okay with that. Yes, there's one.
I think one interesting aspect we talked about was how like it indirectly also deals with like national borders and how these artificial lines on the world map, like these result in what passport you get, and the passport you get decides pretty much about the rest of your life, or how you can live the rest of your life, depending on how strong it is, where you can get, where you can work, what you can do. While like for example, we as Germans, or say most of us here have a German passport, are really privileged that we can get basically anywhere in the world with minimal problems. If you are from like a foreign country, I mean, the story is not playing in the current day, like the nationality that she has. I mean, she's from Eastern Europe. It's implied it's not. They haven't been integrated into the EU yet. So she's like from third country, so she's not allowed to roam freely inside of the EU, and that's like where her problem starts, because she's in this weird gray area where her only ticket into Ireland, her husband, disappeared. She's not really allowed to be there, but nobody takes her away, so she's constantly in this like liminal space of not only feeling, but like also legally she's not really, she doesn't really have the right to be there, or the feeling that she should be there. I mean, she even said at one point that she waited for like the border control to knock at her door and deport her, but they somehow never came.
Which goes to show how enigmatic these institutional structures can be, right? Again, to somebody who doesn't know them, but must know them in order to persevere, right? Yeah, thanks for bringing that up too. Okay, maybe let's go to the anthologies. I want to thank you very much for these contributions. That was very stimulating, I think. So in the literary marketplace, short stories are virtually always published together with other texts, as you will know. And I would like to have a look at the short story anthology as the short story's most important publication format. The reason being that the anthology, in various ways, caters to this idea of being various. The term anthology goes back to the ancient Greek term anthologein, pardon my Greek, which means to collect flowers or blossoms. And it nicely captures the idea that anthologies are carefully arranged selections in which individual texts become part of a larger polyphonic whole. As Elke Docker, I'm not fully sure if I pronounce this correctly, but I'll stick with this. Docker? Okay, thank you. One of the leading scholars on the Irish short story, that I know, puts it, it is precisely this non-coincidence of the material unit of publication and the verbal unit of the story that characterizes the short story as a genre. The publication context of a short story has an influence on the reader's understanding of that story. Different contexts evoke different meanings. I'm currently teaching a course on science fiction anthologies, and it is very interesting to see how anthologies go about this non-coincidence. On the one hand, anthologies are marked by the disparate nature of their material, right? We have unconnected stories by different authors with different interests and backgrounds, selected by the editor, yes, but the selection criteria are not always clear or simply very subjective. Anthologies might also feature stories from different eras or genres, and from a publisher's perspective, this is very unattractive to booksellers and customers because the product appears to be a jumbled mess rather than a coherent whole, right? There is also the, as Paul March Russell puts it, the added aesthetic concern that reading several stories together violates post-contention, that the short story is to be read as a single and self-sufficient unit. We've been there before, right? Somebody explicitly said one of the charms of the short story is that you can read it in one sitting, and that gives you this therefore intense and kind of complete reading experience. On the other hand, anthologies employ many strategies aimed at creating coherence, and here are some of them. Being various, as mentioned earlier, only included commissioned stories. This way, Caldwell could make sure that the stories, as disparate as they may be, speak to the same theme and that they are all contemporary. We've also had a look at the editorial introduction. And again, according to this quote here at the top, this is one of the most powerful tools, according to the author, this is one of the most powerful tools for creating coherence because of its programmatic function. It can be mined for authorial and editorial statements about form, genre, or aesthetics. And we did exactly this earlier with Caldwell's introduction as well. And anthologies contain many other cotexts that enter a dialogue with individual stories, bio notes, epigraphs, and so on and so forth. Some anthologies are also part of an entire series of anthologies, and this one is no exception, right? New Irish Short Stories, you find several installments of this by different editors, featuring different texts. So here we even have cotexts beyond the material unit of publication, that is the single printed book. All this is why I really like this description of the anthology as a polyphonic echo chamber. So just to give you an idea, from another example that I found so compelling that I just felt like including it, although it has nothing to do with Ireland. So on the left-hand side, you find the cover that we've had, and just earlier I saw the one that Jennifer Meyer has, which is very different, right? So this is orange, so the names are missing here. So this is, of course, a selling point usually, right? That you have these names, Sally Rooney, that's a great name, Kevin Barry, again, one of the Irish short story people who came up with the Little Kingdoms and Town and Country and so on and so forth. Emma McBride, people will know, Sinead Gleason, who also edited another of those anthologies as far as I recall. Right, and the other one on the right-hand side does something also that I found very interesting. So this is Octavia's Brew. This is science fiction short stories from social justice movements. So here, lots of people working in social justice organizations were asked to provide short stories for this one. And you see all these symbols there, right? So the dog there, this diamond shape, these waves and so on. And all of these refer to individual stories in the anthology. So each story has as it's on its first page one of those icons, right? So here you can see how individual stories have an icon, and then you find the entirety of these icons on this cover, right? And then they form this shape of this vague person there that is part of Octavia's. But I found that very compelling as a strategy of drawing everything together again, right? So you can see how this way of providing or advertising this anthology as a whole goes together with the individual stories. I found that really helpful. Okay, then to round things off, let's have a quick look at the polyphony of being various beyond then the introduction and the cover. So first of all, Caldwell took care to include a broad range of authors, 24 in total. The balance, as she has it, is 2/3 female, 1/3 northern, 2/3 born in Ireland, 2/3 currently resident. So again, right, being various in this sense. The anthology also features several well-known authors who are also advertised on the cover: Rooney, Gleason, McBride, and Barry, among newcomers such as Nicole Flattery. Not all of these new authors are young authors, however. So some of them are in their 40s, 50s, or even 60s, only just beginning to publish and write stories. And second, many of the stories speak to each other thematically. While there are no explicit intertextual links, such as a character appearing in several stories by different authors, they shed light on shared concerns from different perspectives. If we compare Alienation with Okori's Brown Lady 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or Jan Ge's How I Fell in Love with the Well-Documented Life of Alexander Whelan, we are made aware of the many facets of immigration as the story's characters struggle with similar and different aspects of having to get along in Ireland. And we've had this before in the short story itself as well, right? The African women versus then the main protagonist and narrator of Alienation. In Brown Lady 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the perspective on immigration is that of the female and the male and homosexual African immigrant Joseph, who lives in a provision hostel, right? So one of those institutions or facilities that you live in until your status as a refugee or immigrant is clarified. In contrast, the I narrator in Jan Ge's story is a female student who, together with her mother, emigrated from China. And in contrast to Joseph, she is an Irish citizen by now and integrated into the university's community. And still, simply based on her looks, she keeps facing this question also posed in Kayamu's story: where are you really from? Such texts may, according to Anne Mulhall, function as correctives to the centering dominant of the white native point of view on the migrant other, while also demonstrating the broad range of experiences of immigration. Other stories deal with familiar Irish themes with a new perspective on the tellability of certain themes. Motherhood, as you may know, is one of the most classic themes in Irish literature, and stories such as Stretch Marks or Privacy break new ground by not mincing words in their descriptions of motherhood. They do not idealize, but rather show the challenges and self-doubt, and are also very graphic in their depiction of, for example, morning sickness, or how bloody and messy it is giving birth can be. So to sum up this discussion, Alienation, as so many other contemporary Irish short stories, demonstrate the form's close connection to the changes brought about by modernity. They attempt to depict individuals who nonetheless function as metaphors for the changes beneath the surface of Irish society, specifically by focusing on marginalized groups. They prioritize glimpses or insight over causality and closure. Again, we have this open ending in Alienation, as you may recall. Furthermore, it is precisely the short story's brevity that enables short story writers to quickly pick up on current social trends and developments. By foregrounding transition as Ireland's most pervasive meta-narrative, these stories also foreground Irish identity itself as a liminal experience, a not yet and a not anymore at the same time. And by doing so, they keep asking questions about what it means to be Irish in a changing world, and challenge assumptions which inform received ways of thinking about Irish identity. Crucially, contemporary Irish short stories do this by reflecting the full spectrum of diversity. They address mutable abilities in areas such as sexuality and gender, mental health, the tension between secularization and religion, and as shown in alienation, ethnic and cultural differences. And the publication format of the anthology plays a central role here, I would argue. So far more than a mere solution to the problem of publishing short fiction, the anthology is a literary form which plays a major part in the production, promotion, reception, evaluation, and understanding of the short story. Although the production and marketing of anthologies is itself influenced by the developments of the genre, by critical movements, and by broader national, cultural, or social concerns, the anthology does not merely reflect these factors and concerns, it also reinforces and consolidates them. Throughout the history of the short story, anthologies have been instrumental in raising the profile and shaping the general understanding of this literary form. As instruments in education and canon formation, anthologies have also been used to establish a specific tradition, to promote new writers, or to recover forgotten ones. And binaries is therefore more than just the vessel of 24 stories. It is part of an ongoing discussion or discursive formation that keeps asking questions about contemporary Irishness. Ireland is in transition, and so is literature, one could conclude. Thank you very much. That was a lot of time for questions and discussion. Thank you very much again for the contributions. Very, very nice, very helpful.
So yes, thank you so much for the very interesting talk. So I would just say, I want to talk then, I will just lead through discussion. So are there any questions? Also from the chat. So start here. Is there anything you'd like to ask or add to the discussion beforehand?
I can start to break the ice and give everyone some time to think. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I didn't know the short story before. I hadn't read it, so thank you. I really liked it as well, and I really enjoyed the discussion as well. I have a question about the form again. You already discussed the form and gave so many good reasons of why the short story is a kind of a way of forging or forming, discussing new Irish identities, and I think they're entirely good reasons. I do wonder though, is it really only about the form? I mean, there are many other forms which can do the same. The novel does the same. We have Anna Milkman, we have, you mentioned Edna O'Brien, and so on. Or might there be something kind of clinging on to an Irish tradition that is on a formal level, almost what the short stories are also doing, namely on the one hand, bringing in a sense of kind of forging this new identity, realizing oneself and so on, but on the other hand, sticking to these, you mentioned the stereotypes, the cliches, the traditions, perhaps, perhaps it's a clinging to a tradition which is very much an Irish tradition, the short story collection, and trying to kind of give this old form new content. Kind of thing. I don't know. So is there something perhaps also a national tradition? Is there something where new voices try to shape and reform this Irish tradition?
I would totally agree with this. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So if we, again, go back to this idea of the short story as a home of the margins, obviously, Ireland has been on the margins of then, well, England, Britain, Europe, and so on, ever since the Normans came around in the 20th century, right? So here we can see that this, again, this entire country then maybe, or nation or place is a good, well, location or space or biotope for writing short stories, absolutely. And yes, the question to what extent you pick up on this established tradition and to what extent you deviate or break with it is, I guess, a case-by-case issue from the stories. We find some in there. Which one was that? The Adminical exists, I think. Yeah, this one has this very interesting back and forth between the descriptions of somebody and the stream of consciousness kind of narration of somebody who is suffering from mental illness. So it feels very, it has this very postmodern kind of looked at, and others are more obviously embedded into this tradition of, again, we have a mother who is caring for her family and so on and so forth. Yeah, so there's a broad range, I would say. And yes, some of them really pick up on these traditions and others deliberately break with that, I would argue.
Or even migration being such a kind of traditional topic, not only immigration, but also out of migration, but it's oftentimes from the other side, perhaps now stories are being retold.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Again, we've also been there before with this idea that also, it's not only migration by, again, people coming from other places, but people coming back. And they are struggling. There's, again, sorry for coming back to Irish science fiction once more, this exile, where an Irishman emigrates to I think the moon it is, to the moon, and then comes back, and then again sees Ireland totally changed, and at the end of the day goes back to the moon again in order to, because now there is no place like home. This is how the story ends, right? So again, different notions of home coming here as well by different people. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you also from my side for the great talk, and also I also enjoyed reading the short story and the discussion, and I haven't known the author before, I liked it particularly because it comprises such a huge variety of topics that you can deal with, not only here in the seminar but also in an EFA classroom, of course. This is our context here, and when we exchanged our ideas via email, we found it difficult to decide on a short story.
Yes.
So, yeah, maybe you can tell us a bit why, and maybe you can also make other suggestions for our students.
Yeah, absolutely.
What you would find worth reading maybe in a classroom in this context.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it hard to decide because there are so many in there that I liked simply, and when I do anthologies, I think this choice is, of course, then limited by the anthology, and at the same time you wonder, where do I start within the anthology? Because again, right, this is a very deliberately arranged list, right? So in some cases with my SF class, I decided that we go just with the first story in order to see what the editor found was the best kind of gateway story, right? Or the last one, so that kind of rounds off the entire thing. So that went into that. At the end of the day, I decided to go with this one simply because, as you mentioned, it picks up on these different themes, right? That identity here means this coinciding, or this clash between gender and migration and so on and so forth. Others that are worth reading, I think those that I mentioned before, right? So Stretch Marks by Elske Rahil gives you this very visceral experience of, again, pregnancy and so on. It's an uncomfortable read and a very good read at the same time, if that makes sense. We discussed how I fell in love with the well-documented life of Alexander Whelan previously, which is about how does she put it? The online death of this Alexander Whelan. It's on Facebook, but maybe it is transferable to other social media platforms. So that one I found interesting. Transactions gives you a take on age as a category. That is also interesting. Age combined with a gambling addiction. That would be one. Brown Lady 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mentioned that one. Then what else? Echo is about again, one of those, most of them are not really lighthearted, right? So that's something to be prepared for. But Echo by Stuart Neville is one of, I think that was the one, about the early death of a sibling, and then the surviving sibling is being blamed for this and kind of recreates this dead sibling in their mind somehow. That one I found interesting. And then maybe one of my other favorites is Feather by Nicole Flattery, which is about somebody who is being released from a mental institution and goes back into real life and gets this kind of companion that is supposed to guide her, some kind of therapy program. And only at the end of the story, it is revealed that this is a pet therapy program and that the companion is actually a chicken called Simon, and the story is very good at keeping this information from you as a reader. So here we go again with the short story as a form, right, of providing and holding back on information. Then I found super good. So these are, I would say, would be my favorites at least, or recommendations.
Anything else I'd like to add? Any questions? Maybe Jad?
No, we don't know really.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. I would like to come back to liminality. You may have guessed, because I think I think we can all agree that, and you said so, that the short story is in itself a liminal genre, but also lends itself ideally to present liminality in certain kinds of ways. And when we look at alienation, I think it's what strikes me most with regard to liminality is her whole existence is so liminal. This is shown when she, steps to the side and when these other immigrants appear, and she really literally is on the margins then. Yeah. And then also the hairdresser scene,
I think is a liminal scene in itself, because what happens at the hairdresser, you go in, there's a transitional phase, and you go out a different person if it's a good visit to the hairdresser. And I think that it's literally, but also, you know, it's a very good image, I think, of, and she's not going out, and we don't see her new haircut, and she's threading it. And the whole story, I think, points towards such an extremely extended period of in-betweenness, which I think may have gone on for 20 years or so, because she says that the story starts with when the children are relatively young and her husband leaves her, and then the children have already gone to university or college. So it's about 20 years that she spent in this liminal state, in this in-betweenness. And she cannot get out, even not at the ending. And we were saying there might be some kind of moment of revelation, but we don't know whether she will act on it. Yeah, and I think that's very relevant also in a general context, in a real context for us with regard to, you know, migration issues, because the realization of these people spending so much time in between states, in a liminal state, in Okori writes in her other text about the hostel life as well, this hostel life, where they are also, you know, their kind of arrival is suspended. And it's suspended for years and years and years and years. And I find that very pertinent and very topical about the story. And this isn't really a question. I'm just realizing. I'm sorry.
I totally agree with that. There's maybe one story in there that kind of revels in that in a different way. That is A Partial List of the Saved by Daniel McLaughlin, where we have a male protagonist whose parents have divorced, as so often in these stories as well. And then his father is kind of in love with his housekeeper, that is his age. And then at the end, there is this scene where finally it must be decided whether this new partner gets the house because this father is about to die. And then they're driving in the car. And then this protagonist, this son of this dying man, sits in the car and feels like, okay, he would like to stretch this moment until eternity, so it can remain undecided. It's the rare exception, I think, where this is tackled in a very different way, in a comparatively positive way.
Liminal.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry.
Also adding on to the thought of liminality, she told us that she always gets the same haircut. So perhaps if the story were to go on, there would be no revelation that she has changed after visiting the hairdresser.
Most probably, or the new hairdresser is changing her life. We don't know. For the better, hopefully. But it's an open-ended. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just found the quote, maybe, if I may. Connor, I think is his name. Yeah, Connor. He desperately wanted to keep his father in the car as long as possible, to cocoon him in this space where nothing sad could be said as long as the drive had not yet ended. He would drive forever if he could, if it would save his father from anything. Right? So here we go.
Based on that, I have a question, which I was wondering when I first saw the cover, because we talked here about water as means of borders, being used as borders, like rivers. We read the introduction to Thin Places, where the narrator is in the water swimming, as well as, not get in the water, but jumping into the water. And I was thinking like, water is being life, of course, but also if you are inside, you're enclosed in water, you might drown. And it's like in kind of imprisonment as well. And I could see that in alienating. And then I was wondering whether the topic or that theme of water as it's being used in the cover, if you can find that anywhere in the short stories.
Yeah, there was one. Was that Echo? Yeah, Echo is one of those. This dead sibling that I mentioned. I think they, as far as I recall, they actually drowned. So here we go. And Paul McVeigh's The Swimmers. This is about I think child abuse in a swimming pool. Again, not the happiest topic. We're in Ireland, right? where this is about learning to swim and at the same time learning to shield yourself from the advances of adults somehow. Again, this is less positively commented, but I think it ends with a comment on having to learn to swim and having to get along with what was that? She couldn't swim either. No, okay, no. So yeah, this is again one of those less positive takes on that. And beyond that, there's not that much water in there.
Okay, that's like an alienation where she had to learn to swim, but she's struggling.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Your questions? Yeah, Valentin.
I have a question about the story animation in general, because I thought a bit about, does this story have to play in Ireland to work? And I'm not sure if it has to play in Ireland to work. So I wanted to know if you have like an idea what makes like this like a uniquely Irish what gives this the ability to call itself a uniquely Irish story, because I couldn't really think about something.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I guess generally migration it's maybe not the best one, but this kind of universal experience, right? People travel to all kinds of places or migrate to all kinds of places. And I guess virtually everywhere you have to struggle with, again, this tension between assimilation and integration to a certain degree, right? So I'm with you that far, definitely. You mentioned one of those dimensions yourself, I think, earlier, right? This legal context that is kind of vague, that is particularly Irish then, right? Because right, your way of your status of marriage and having children and so on is different, of course. And this is then clearly an Irish problem here, right? You have another one not mentioned in this, right? This PPS number that you need to get when you arrive in Ireland. You need only to get your PPS number. It's basically the number for everything, right? You first you can get this if you have a job or you have a residence, but you can only get a job if you have a residence. You can only get a residence if you have a job. So again, this kind of problem, right? And this is different in other places. And the other thing mentioned, what was it? What did I say? I think there was another one, but I'm currently missing out on this.
What she writes
exactly,
about
that was what I was thinking. Yeah.
I think that's the strongest link.
Yeah.
To me, that's the strongest link to Ireland.
Yeah. So it has been this right desired place of destination, right, for so many people. I think maybe specifically German, as she puts it here, right? This is different in other countries, I think. I don't know.
Probably also the religious issues. They're
True.
Very Irish.
Yeah.
This is at least my.
Yeah, true. I would agree.
And I think she also speaks about the Irish myth of being like a country of fairy tales and Celtic people, and how she romanticizes it when foreigners also romanticize it.
Yeah, and they're all friendly, and she kind of puts that into the question when she writes about it. And people perceive of them to be friendly. She doesn't say they are friendly. Something like that. Paraphrasing.
So I guess that that's what I would say about that. But I guess one could probably transfer this into different contexts and tweak a few nuances.
Questions in the chat?
No, still no.
Yeah, then thank you. Thank you for your talk. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation again.